Друзья мои, привет! Буквально пару минут назад
Dear friends, just a couple of minutes ago, our attackers,
смогли
Bulba hackers, they were able to
события.
execute inaccessible event and organize certain problems with purchasing of tickets in our transportation company that was deployed in our replica. Well, very often the main reason for such events in real life
которые
are real vulnerabilities which exist in the infrastructure of the company.
как правильно их
And how can we discover them properly? How can we properly inform about them? And how can we properly close them? We're going to speak about it. And I'm going to speak with Vadim Solovyov. Hello, Vadim. Vadim is the head of
из-за угроз информационной безопасности
Threat Analysis and Informational Security Team in Positive Technologies.
сейчас, дорогие мои
You
зрители,
have, my dear viewers, you have a unique opportunity
самое интересное,
to hear the most interesting things from Vadim's presentation, which you will hear in Positive Technologies Days. And when your presentation will happen, my presentation will happen tomorrow. Okay, we're ahead of time.
будем говорить, подводить итоги.
Today, we're going to look at results of what's going to be spoken about tomorrow. I think this is wonderful. Hello, Vadim. Hello, Julia. Can you tell me, please, why are you working with vulnerabilities? Why? Well, I think that this was my evolutionary process. I just had to do it. Plus, all the trends are moving in the direction that
менеджмент уязвимостей и
the vulnerability management and proper, timely processing of them, I think this is where the future lies.
уязвимости оперативно.
If vendors are not going to remove vulnerabilities and researchers are not going to inform them properly in full volume and responsibly, which is very important, then the world can be
Поэтому с уязвимостью
encoded by the encoders, so we have to work with it. Okay, Vadim, I think that Positive Technologies is involved in discovery of vulnerabilities in the course of 20 years. As long as Positive Technologies lives, that's how long it does it. So in the course of this long period of time, children has grown up, went to universities and got married, and the work with vulnerabilities also have changed. So how in the course of this period, the process of search, recording, closure, what has changed in the life of the researcher? Well, I understand your question. I think we have to first of all speak about the break-even point, which happened last year when we've been sanctioned. And at this moment of time, we did feel that reporting process has changed, especially in the side of the vendors who are being reported to. We have American and non-American vendors, because American vendors, they
коммуницировать.
didn't have any right to communicate with us because they have their own regulators, they have their own orders, and we've been searching for ways around how can we inform them about their vulnerabilities, maybe not openly, maybe not through official channels, so that they, in any case, would be able to fix this vulnerability and would be able to provide and deliver update patches to their end users, and if the users will be secure. This is the main reason why the informational security lives for, so that people could use informational security software, hardware, and different, and not be subject to any risks, so that somebody would exploit a vulnerability about which they have not been informed. Well, tell me, please, when you communicate with vendors, I've heard on many occasions about different stories.
один
Stories that one vendor is working properly, another one is stumbling very often, another one does some crazy things. So let's look at your work with vendors as a separate process. Can you tell us about some interesting features which might happen with vendors and which we can get rid of and to simplify our life? Well, the biggest feature is when the vendor is not reacting to researchers at all. Does it happen? Yes, it happens very often. It's an often situation when vendor has never faced any vulnerabilities. Maybe if it's a niche product and they never had to work with researchers. So they receive a letter in their mail when some unknown person tells them, okay, dear vendor, we have discovered the vulnerability, let's communicate about it.
Если не знают, что ответить.
The vendor is getting lost. They don't know how should they reply. So they are hiding and do nothing about it.
Не только
So what should we do? We should search for options, not only through the email, maybe some personal connections to this vendor when you will be able to explain in a human language that we fight for the good. It's not a blackmail. It's nothing bad. We just want to help you. We just want to make your product safer and to protect your users. This is an obvious one. The second situation that we face is when
ты ему отдаешь
we start communication with the vendor, you deliver information about the vulnerability, they look at it, everything's okay, but they never patch their product. So this process of vendor notification, the main objective is for vendor to produce the patch and to keep the users on the secure side. So on a cognitive, subconscious level, there's a certain
цели в виде получения
goal
исследователям, что да, я
to
молодец, нашел
have certain achievements as a researcher. I have discovered the vulnerability, but the main goal is to defend end users to the update or patch manufactured by the vendor. But if the vendor is not making this patch, it means that this process is halted and broken.
Обновление.
такой
But why vendors do not make those patches? Well, it does happen, and there are different reasons for non-patching, why vendors are not making patches. And I'm going to speak about it tomorrow. Okay, good. Any other stories from the lives of different vendors?
шокирующая
It might happen totally shocking research and
уязвимости. То есть наоборот,
they approach responsible discovery and they do everything properly, and sometimes it's an anti-story but in a positive key when vendor does everything properly and you think that okay, these guys finally they're ripe, and then you go and tell everybody in the course of the week you reported this product to this vendor and they've done more than you expected. You shouldn't tell them how to receive identifiers in different databases. You shouldn't ask them to request links in the advisor. They requested it, they know everything, they took everything, they inform about the deadlines when they will have publications, when the patch will be produced, and just before the patch they will make a letter, okay, dear researcher, in the next week we are going to make this patch which is going to close your vulnerability, please keep it in mind. So it's an ideal picture and it happens once in a while. So things that you're telling me, I think this is very mandatory minimum from the vendor to make a link to the researcher, to refer to the researcher. What's so good about it? Can you make an example? Why is it so good? Well, the
число вен
good side of it is that only few vendors follow these good practices. Only few vendors practically go through this path, and they've repeated it on several occasions, and right now they are ready to reproduce this procedure
поэтому
on every situation. That's why it makes you happy when vendor does everything properly. I cannot say that it happens every day amongst the foreign vendors, Russian vendors. No, we should not differentiate them.
и у нас есть
We cannot say who is better and who is worse. And we do have companies which do everything properly within this discovery of vulnerabilities process from their side. So this is a process of removal of vulnerabilities. And speaking about foreign companies, they do have a lot of companies like that, and they do it successfully. So when you write a notification to the vendor that you've discovered in their product certain vulnerability, are there certain life hacks or maybe certain templates or forms? How can you write this notification? Is it a template, or maybe there's a certain requirements, or just, hello, dude, I discovered this in your program. If you want, I'll show it to you.
всегда по-разному.
Well, it's always different. It's always different. And it all depends.
Условно уровня зрелости
Okay, relatively speaking, it depends on the level of maturity of the vendor.
устранения уязвимости.
His maturity in the process of vulnerability of removal. For example, he has a big inflow of vulnerabilities from researchers. Vendor does know how to process them, and they try to optimize this process. The most obvious thing is to place the policies of vulnerability discoveries, which says how the researcher should act if they find vulnerability in this vendor's product, and then they will have contact information. And this is the simplest option of cooperation. For example, you Google the name of the vendor, you Google disclosure policy, and disclosure policy has all the information. The more complicated variant is when they don't have this policy and you have to apply skills of searching in the internet at least to find any context from them.
Вещи
Будем
своими
будем
именами.
называть
Okay, we're going to call those things with their own names.
ты
Of course.
почту вплоть до того,
You are searching for their even mail. For example, one Chinese vendor was reported through the sales they've entered. And by the way, they've reacted very fast to these sales. At the same time, security of a certain mail, they don't have anything like it. So if
прийти.
you will come one time, second time through the sales, and then they will be able to roll out the page with policy of disclosure of vulnerabilities, how it was happening with this Chinese vendor. Because in response to our letter, after a certain period of time, they've told us, okay, we've made this page, you will find the contact information, and if you will send something, please follow this link.
Такой вариант бывает. Бывает, когда
This option
представлено на
is also viable.
платформе или
Then also the company is represented on a certain back bounty platform or the link. In this situation, the platform connects the company with the researcher.
за счет вот этого сервиса, веб-формы,
And with the help of the service or the web form,
сведений об уязвимости,
the information about vulnerability is being transferred from the researcher to the vendor. So they have to fill a certain form. You should provide them certain detailed information. You write something, or you just fill the basic form. Well, if you fill the basic form under link,
уязвимости сообщений.
they do ask about some certain basic things about vulnerability, and then they open a ticket. Within this ticket, you can communicate with the vendor.
Про баг-баунти я чуть-чуть расскажу.
As for the back bounty, well, I'm going to tell you tomorrow about it. Some fun cases when you could report vendor to the back bounty, but then
Оказали свое влияние на этот процесс и
the sanctions have influenced this process and how we've been searching for the way out of this situation. So you're going to be speaking about some fun cases. How many of those fun cases do you have? Well, about 10 of them. Can you give me one today, just as a teaser?
ну давай тот, про который завтра я не помню.
Okay, I will speak about the one that I wasn't going to speak about tomorrow. It's a simple case. It was a very tragic case for us as researchers. At the same time, we had a happy end for the users.
Тут конкретно история с санкциями, когда мы пытаемся
It's a sanction-related story. When we try to get in touch with vendor, the vendor does not get in touch with us. We are searching for this vendor through all the channels. We're writing to this vendor. Then finally we find Russian rep office and we find a Russian representative and we say to them, we send report to your headquarter organization, nothing happens. Do you want us to send it to you? So we send it to Russian rep office.
как-то там внутри пошел.
We sent a report and it was accepted through our personal contacts. And we've been informed that this report have reached their own research team inside of the vendor company. They've looked at this vulnerability, they found it, they were able to produce the patch, and then we've lost the contacts.
Долго все это продолжалось, но
For a long, it was continued for a certain period of time, but after a certain period of time, they came back to us through this Russian rep office, and they've told us, yes,
уязвимость
we have discovered this vulnerability, we have fixed it.
пользователи теперь смогут
So now users will be able to install the update, but we are not going to mention you anywhere. Yeah, I wanted to hear this tragic story. Yeah, because the researcher wants to be referred.
толику
He needs to have a little piece of glory after he has notified the vendor that I've done this job. At least say things, official things, somewhere in the news. Can you show my name or whatever?
Помню, ты рассказывал про себя в
I do remember you've been telling us fun stories when you had to fill a notification for the vendor. So when you submit information about vulnerability to manufacturers or to the vendors. Vendors should receive and give you CV.
Это было совершенно
And you've been telling us how it was happening.
Я не знаю, я хотел бы это, конечно, на завтра.
You give spoilers about tomorrow. I want to speak about it tomorrow, please. But briefly speaking, just in a couple of words without any details, we have taught our vendors to receive CVE for their own vulnerabilities. But tomorrow you will have different and more detailed information. Well, this can be automated, and it would be a right thing to do. Right thing to do from the point of view of researcher to understand
Получение айдишник.
that if vendor denies you in getting this ID, it's not always because they don't want to. Sometimes it's just because they don't know, and you have to help the vendor. Okay, can you give us top three advices for the researcher how to properly you can prepare the vendor? How can you prepare your vendor? How can you teach the vendor to work with vulnerabilities? Well, the most important thing is the human factor, human relations. We need to understand that on the other side, we also have real humans. So should we send get pictures? No, it could be the end of the communication process and discovery of vulnerabilities. But in the beginning, you should be very serious but friendly.
На той стороне, на стороне вен,
So that on the other side, on the side of the vendor, people also should understand that you came to them not to blackmail, but as a human to another human. You want to share these discoveries to make their product better and safer. And I think this is a step number one. Step number two, well, I have a question. Please don't forget about the step number 2 and 3, but I have a question. I work in the press, public relations department, and my working mail receives millions of letters. And sometimes I receive letters like, well, I have discovered certain vulnerability in one of your whatever. Can you reply to me? Well, honestly, I think that this is phishing.
ты можешь
And this is the end of my communication with this address. You can redirect these letters to me, and I'm going to tell you whether it's right or wrong. So I should send them to you. Yeah, copy me, CC me. If Ask will approve it, I will look at it. But how can you write a letter so that you wouldn't be considered to be a phishing attack? First of all, you have to introduce yourself, because when two people, even on the street, when they want to get acquainted with each other and ask something from each other, first of all, the good command code, who are you? I'm this and this and this. I do this, this and this. So give minimal information about yourself that can be checked. Then you can start telling about some things which
подтвердить тот факт, что да,
can confirm to the fact that you do know about a product or you've discovered vulnerability and some minimal details. Yes, it's understandable that you shouldn't disclose all the information as a researcher, because who knows? If as a researcher you have approached the wrong person and maybe you're delivering information about a zero-day vulnerability to a wrong person, it's not a responsible approach. So first of all, you have to build a contact with vendor, and you should understand that even on the side of the vendor, not everybody should know about technical details of certain vulnerability.
правильно будет запросить.
The right way to do it would be to find contacts of those people inside of this vendor company who are involved in
Вот это
removing vulnerabilities in their products. So this is advice number 2.
номер 3. Если вдруг
Advice number 3, if vendor
нужно
will
уточнить,
deny you,
в чем
you should
то есть
try to specify why is he denying you, why don't they want to communicate with you. Maybe it's not a negative story when the vendor says, well, I don't want to deal with you. Maybe they're afraid, or maybe they miss some information and you need to help them, because not every vendor knows which place in the total process they take, because in the process they have users, and sometimes vendor forget because we do everything for the user, and sometimes perception of the user inside of the vendor that, well, they can buy a new piece of hardware, it will be more safe than the previous one with the vulnerability, and let them do that. It's also irresponsible, and you have to explain this to vendor.
по отношению к пользователю.
You have to explain their position towards the end user, so that they wouldn't lose connection with reality,
Только ради
with the real world.
денег он все это делает.
It's not just about making the money.
ради зарабатывания
Well, in the end run, it's all about the money. Okay, can you tell me, please, in recent year or in recent 6 months, a lot of things have changed in our lives and in cybersecurity as well. And definitely, these changes have involved vulnerability operations. I know that there are new requirements from the side of regulators about updates and how can we build our work in these conditions? Well, I would give you a recommendation on how can one properly test and update the software. We still develop those recommendations, but nevertheless, the idea is following.
Столкнулись с ситуацией, когда
By now, we have faced a situation when a number of Western and not Western foreign vendors have left Russia.
иногда
At the same time, sometimes the sales are continued or some employees are staying in the offices here, but product support has been halted.
покупатель
So basically speaking, Russian buyers and Russian company which uses these foreign software or the hardware, they have faced a situation that support was stopped. But the life had not stopped, and global researchers they find vulnerabilities in those products, and they inform vendors about it. Vendor produces updates, but these updates are not coming to Russian companies. And this is problem number one. Problem number two
эти обновления могут прийти, но
is
в себе
when these updates can arrive, but they can have some non-documented injections or trojans or some destructive components, which
пишет весь софт.
after this update will shut down the software or the hardware. It's not a nice situation, and we would like to have a certain instruction. We would like to have a certain recommendation which the company could follow in order to safely test this update before installing it. That's what I'm speaking about. Thank you very much, Vadim. Dear friends, I would like to remind you that these and many other things, for example, does a Russian Mitra needs to search, and do you need to search vulnerabilities in the open source? Well, Vadim is going to tell you about it tomorrow in the framework of Positive Hack Days program, which is going to be started tomorrow. But today we had a brief spoiler. Vadim, thank you very much. Thank you, Julia. Please don't switch off because I'm going to be replaced by Vladimir Zapolyansky, and in his studio, he's going to have a new guest, Alexander Morozov. And Vladimir and Alexander are going to discuss problems of cyber defense on the side of organizations
быстро
and how fast hypothetical criminal can penetrate inside of any company. Stay with us.